Providence just lived through another winter reminder of how much city government actually touches people's lives, from snow removal to basic services. After the last major storm, residents across the city were frustrated, stuck, and asking questions about city leadership. Now, State Representative David Morales is mounting a primary challenge to Mayor Brett Smiley, positioning himself in a progressive grassroots lane that echoes the kind of insurgent campaigns we've seen in places like New York. Morales just released a detailed snow removal plan of his own, a direct response to what he says is a failure of leadership. The question is, can grassroots energy turn into a real coalition strong enough to unseat an incumbent mayor? That's what we're digging into today.
Bartholomewtown.
And welcome into Bartholomewtown, where we are brought to you in part by the University of Rhode Island Online. Are you ready to take the next step in your career? At URI Online, they offer business and leadership-focused programs designed to fit your life. Whether your goal is to advance your career in fields like public administration, supply chain management, or training and development, their online programs provide the flexibility you need with a high-quality education you deserve. Learn from experienced faculty and collaborate with a network of professionals, all from the comfort of your home or wherever life takes you. Visit uri.edu/online to explore programs and start building your future today. URI Online. Learn anywhere with us. Welcome into Bartholomewtown. I'm Bill Bartholomew. So here we are. It is definitely election season. And what's been interesting, we've obviously had State Representative David Morales on the show a zillion times. We've had Mayor Brett Smiley on the show a zillion times. In fact, we'll be welcoming the mayor on in a couple of weeks here on Bartholomewtown. I'll be heading to City Hall for a sit down on a number of different things, and I'm sure we'll get some reaction to today's conversation with Representative Morales. But look, folks, this is one of, I guess what you would describe it as, is one of the more interesting races in Rhode Island right now. A lot of eyes on the governor's race, the attorney general's race, definitely something that has drawn a lot of attention as well. But Providence mayor, it's always an outsized, we'll call it almost like you put an asterisk next to it and throw it into the statewide races conversation, right? Even if you don't live in Providence, everybody knows who the mayor of Providence is. As the city of Providence goes, so goes the state of Rhode Island. So this is a big time situation here. Now, the reality is on the ground, a lot different than what I think many, many people that I've heard from in the community, if you will, here in Providence. At least my understanding of this race is a little bit different than maybe some people are feeding back to me. And here's the thing. David Morales is no doubt a very talented individual and a guy who has core values that have been pretty well tested throughout his tenure inside the General Assembly. No doubt emerging from the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. And if you're looking at this to the left-right spectrum within the Democrat Party, you'd say, here's a guy who is certainly on the left, right? Whatever that means to you, here's a guy who's on the left. You could look at Smiley and say he's more of a centrist at minimum within the context of the Democrat Party, okay? And a lot of people look at Morales and say, here he is, Providence's own version of Mamdani. And while from a tactical standpoint, there's some truth to that, from the standpoint of, okay, let's use social media, let's build a persona, let's get out on the street, all of that is very much so Mamdani-esque. But there's a key difference here, folks, which is that Providence is not New York City, and this race is not the New York City mayoral Democrat primary or general election that just took place. So let's break those down quickly here, folks. Number one, demographically, just in terms of the numbers to build the type of coalition that Mamdani was able to do in New York, very, very different picture here in Providence. And that is both in terms of quantity of votes, but also the size of the, let's say, neighborhood coalitions, or you want to call it ethnic coalitions, things like this. They will not snowball to the extent that they did in New York City, where you had this overwhelming amount of, in some cases, new voters or people who wouldn't typically vote for a leftist being swept into some kind of new coalition, if you will. And part of the reason, in addition to just numbers, that was able to work was you had an historically terrible slate of candidates in New York, and you just don't have that here in Providence. Democrat primary, obviously Andrew Cuomo. We all remember Brad Lander, Adams, the former council president. I mean, in New York, that race in the Democrat primary, while there were some quality names in there there weren't really that many quality campaigns. And obviously, you had Andrew Cuomo thrusted into the midst of this, a generally speaking, dislikable figure. Then when you get to the general election, I mean, come on. Eric Adams kind of on a tributary basis still in the mix. Curtis Sliwa, come on, man. And then Andrew Cuomo, again, wholly unlikable. And the notion that Brett Smiley is the Providence version of Andrew Cuomo in that race is just simply not true. Smiley, an incumbent with enormous support citywide. They say enormous, what does that mean? It means that throughout different pockets of the city and then on a dominant basis on the east side, Brett Smiley is well-liked, well-respected. So this is not a situation where you have a bad candidate and Morales is able to come in and make a challenge from the left that is made a little bit easier because the opponents are so unlikable, right? For Morales to win, and we've seen this, we've seen successes on the Providence City Council coming from the, quote, the left. We've seen some successes of the General Assembly, quote, coming from the left. But on a citywide mayoral, look, folks, there's not going to be a serious Republican challenger. So the mayor's race is the Democrat primary. On that level, Morales has to focus on coalition building. This cannot simply be in the case of Mamdani, picked the 3 issues, ran on those. This can't be something that looks or feels anything like that at the end of the day for Morales. This has to be about reaching out to people who are traditional Smiley voters in the business sector, people who are traditional Smiley voters on the east side, people who are just traditional Smiley voters anywhere, and finding coalition building moments. And I'll tell you what, Morales really did a good job of introducing his abilities to do this on the snow removal. Was the snow situation 100% on Brett Smiley? Nobody can make that argument. But you never want to get beat on weather. And on this one, Smiley got beat on weather. And the reason he really ended up getting on this little tussle within this race, if you will, at least for now, kind of backed into a corner a little bit, is that David Morales did something that is not a leftist maneuver. It's not a Democrat socialist maneuver. It's not a progressive maneuver. Hell, it's not even a Democrat maneuver, which has come out with a robust, detailed snow removal plan a couple of days after the outcry about Smiley's efforts became a top story on a statewide and regional basis. Morales comes out with an actual plan that includes things like real-time maps for plows, hiring more seasonal workers, shoring up more contractors. These are the types of tangible programmatic changes that will resonate with the types of voters that Morales needs to court in order to build the coalition that he would need to unseat Smiley come September. Does that make sense? A little bit of a roundabout way of saying David Morales needs more than just progressive voters if he's going to win this thing. And we'll talk to him about how he's going to do that coming up in just a matter of moments here on Bartholomewtown. Again, Smiley will join me in a couple of weeks here on the podcast live from City Hall. And we are brought to you in part, not only this episode, but our series in general of episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, wherever you get podcasts, weekends on WPRO. We're brought to you by Navigant Credit Union. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org. All right, I'm Bill Bartholomew. It's Bartholomewtown. Now my conversation with State Representative and Providence Mayor candidate David Morales. Representative Morales, thanks for making time to be back here on the podcast. Always a pleasure.
Always happy to see you, Bill. So thank you for having me on.
Of course. Let's talk about the snow removal. Look, I think a lot of residents looked out their window, saw the big storm, and to an extent, there's always a built-in forgiveness or understanding when it comes to any kind of weather-related cleanup or city services. But as time went on, it became pretty clear that snow removal in the city of Providence was way below the standard that even the mayor admitted was acceptable. In response, you put forth an entire snow removal updated plan that included things like real-time maps, kind of like what you see with Rhode Island Energy when the power goes out, seasonal workers, so on and so forth. But to me, why this matters, it was a major step in coalition building and saying, hey, here's a city services functionality of government problem that I want to put forth a solution for that has nothing to do with, I don't know, the DSA or Mamdani or being progressive or anything like that. This is just city services stuff that's going to be required to win this race. What went into developing this, and why was it important to you to come out with something that is city service oriented in terms of a major policy position?
Well, unfortunately, the Smiley administration's response to snow removal has been disastrous, as we've had neighbors that have been especially frustrated with the fact that their side streets went unplowed. We've watched as students have literally had to walk on the road to get to school. And then you have bus stops that are still covered by snow, and a lack of urgency to ensure that our neighbors, especially those with mobility issues, are actually able to get around the city. And this goes back to the basic function of what municipal services mean. City services is about making sure that our roads are in decent conditions. It's about making sure that we have allocated the funding necessary. So when there are weather-related issues, whether it is flooding, whether it is now related to a snowstorm, that we are adequately prepared to meet the moment and make sure that our neighbors are able to still get from point A to point B without feeling unsafe. About making sure that city services are still able to function properly. And what we saw the last 2 weeks, I believe, has been a case of having unqualified administrators in charge of a department that does such critical work. The fact that we have a director of public works that has very little experience and a background around city services, I think speaks volumes to the results that we're seeing now. And a lot of this ties back to why I'm running for mayor. And that is about guaranteeing that working people in our city, that is about guaranteeing that our neighbors that call Providence home can have the reassurance that we're going to be able to deliver on basic city functions while also having a progressive vision as to how we address the housing crisis.
And you mentioned something there that I think is important as well, which is you mentioned the DPW director. And I want to get back to your larger point in just a moment. But look, it is true. Patricia Coyne-Faig was head of the ACI, and then kind of out of nowhere, all of a sudden, just one of those appointments in the Smiley administration that she became DPW director. Look, I don't know offhand if she has enormous experience with trucking and logistics and things like this. I have no idea. Maybe she herself, grew up as a ride along with, maybe her dad ran a DPW. I have no idea. I don't know if this is totally new, and I think it's important to say that. But what we do see is, like you said, a different picture of city government or bureaucracy. Sometimes it comes into focus when we have a crisis. We saw that at Brown University with the police chief removed immediately after the capture of the individual who committed those heinous acts on campus. So you start to reveal what city government actually looks like. So you're saying that you're not satisfied not only with the plan, but the personnel and sort of the orbit of people that are right now making decisions in Providence. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what we have seen the last several weeks is a lack of preparation and a lack of qualified administrators that would have otherwise been better prepared to actually handle and manage city services. And that something like this goes back to the ways in which we communicate to the public. How we communicate to the public in terms of when they can have the reassurance that their side street is actually going to get plowed, or being able to provide them with real-time transparency as to what a DPW truck is responsible in contrast to a contractor. These details matter. And these details especially matter because all of this is a reflection of our taxpayer funds. All of this is a reflection of how we are utilizing the funding that is readily available to make sure we are executing a plan that's going to benefit our neighbors. And as I said before, I think this snow response plan from the Smiley administration was disastrous. Our campaign put forward a plan that actually spelled out how we would adopt best practices seen in other cities and towns similar to Providence, like Rochester, New York, where they have real-time maps that inform neighbors as to what progress has been made. We also incorporated the importance of communication and transparency to let our community know what a potential timeline looks like to ensure that our streets are going to be safe. Safe to travel, safe to walk through, and at the same time being thoughtful about something as critical as a parking ban. I think one of the areas that we saw very early on when it came to this Snow response was how quickly they lifted the parking ban. I mean, the fact is, we still had certain bus routes that were unable to pick up kids and get them to school because the roads still had not been plowed. So it made no sense whatsoever to allow for cars to get back onto that tight street. And I'll give you the example. We saw it on Andam and Huron Street, right in the Valley neighborhood. A bus literally got stuck there for about 20 minutes. And yet, cars were allowed to be back on the street that morning.
Mm. Yeah, and we think to the December debacle of yesteryear here in Rhode Island, which was a major crisis that really, the city and frankly the state actually got caught off guard with a winter storm. It feels like a moment where, it's been obviously climate change induced, in part weather pattern, in part random, in part whatever the case is. Snow has been less prevalent in this area for several years now, but it's New England, and we're going to have major snowstorms with frequency. We're going to have major weather-related events more and more frequently because of climate change, because of shifting weather patterns, and because of infrastructure. Would that be a top priority for you, shoring up infrastructure and response? Is it fair to say that's a priority of the Morales campaign and potential administration, shoring up personnel, infrastructure, and everything that goes into responding to any external crisis, let's say?
Absolutely. The Department of Public Works is such a critical piece of city services. I mean, that is ultimately how we ensure that we're repairing roads in a timely manner. That is the question of whether or not our sidewalks get repaired. It becomes the direction as to how we repair our stormwater infrastructure system. And I think for what we have been seeing over the last several years is a shift away from seasonal personnel and staffing to just outsourcing and contracting services that otherwise should be done by in-house DPW personnel. And that's why in our plan, we highlighted the importance of prioritizing seasonal staff as opposed to growing overly reliant on the means of contractors.
Yeah, I think that's a major shift right there, expanding government, if you will, personnel versus relying on external forces. We could go on about that same parameter in a number of different areas. I mean, the Washington Bridge, for example, this is a common theme. Generally speaking, are you in favor of having more personnel on government payroll versus contractor usage across the board, not just in DPW related things? Do you think that's something the government should do here in Providence, have more people on staff for any number of issues?
I would certainly say so. I think there's a lot to be said about being conscientious of the amount of full-time employees we're able to staff up just given our budget. But nonetheless, we have seen that when we have in-house personnel, there is an improvement in services as opposed to having to be outsourced. I often hear from neighbors that have called Providence home for decades that tell me how trash removal was much better when it was done in-house as opposed to what we see now with waste management. A lot of our neighbors feel underwhelmed by the services that they receive from waste management. And the reality is, again, we have a contract that I do not think is fair enough to the working people in our city. I think waste management has to be held accountable when they continue to have cases of delays, or they miss our neighbor's trash, or they essentially break one of our neighbor's bins because it just comes crashing down, or they allow the bin to stay in the middle of the street. I think there's something to be said about ensuring that waste management is responsible for allowing our neighbors to dispose of their mattress free of cost, as opposed to the process that exists now where you have to pay $27 and bag it up.
Let's talk about a couple other things here before we wrap today. Number one, Plant City announcing that they're closing their Providence location. Look, they've been a controversial business for reasons of what I would call kind of self-inflicted wounds. Their opposition to the bike lane as it was previously constituted has drawn a lot of ire from both transit activists and advocates and others as well. At the same time, the place was an anchor tenant of an area that is so critical to the future of Providence, the 195 redistricting land by the Michael Van Leesten pedestrian bridge. Now you have an empty space. And I go down there all the time. I've said this 1,000 times on the show, so people probably can't stand me saying what I'm about to say anymore. But I go down there all the time at night, especially in the warm weather, and walk around. And you better like looking at swans. I do. I like seeing the swans and their family and everything. That's about all there is to do. It's one of the most boring areas outside of that. And now a major tenant leaving the 195 area. how do we inject life into the city of Providence, particularly at night? And why do you think Plant City is closing? Do you think it's the Washington Bridge or is it something else?
Well, let's remember that we have more than enough opportunity just in terms of the creative entrepreneurs and creative artists that live in our city, that we can bring life to any part of Providence. It just requires layers of investment and coordination. If I was mayor now, one of the immediate actions I'd be taking is being in contact and communication with the landlord to start talking through what thoughts are in terms of the future of that space. Because we have seen that it could be established as a food hall. Plan City showed us that they have the capacity to be able to treat their facility to be a cafe, a restaurant, and essentially a food hall. I think there's something to be said about how we bring local entrepreneurs into that space. Who is to say that we can't have a partial art gallery inside? We have more than enough talent right here in our backyard to be able to tap into it and reach an agreement with the respective property owner to make that reality possible. So I think it's a shortage of imagination and a lack of proactive planning that essentially leads to vacant storefronts. It leads to vacant spaces. And it diminishes the experience for a lot of working people in our city who go to different spaces, whether it's in downtown or some of our neighborhoods, and they feel underwhelmed because the commercial corridor is not as lively as it should be. And this is just another example of that. And I believe very strongly that as long as we provide our local entrepreneurs and creative artists with the opportunity to have access to brick and mortar and have a shared contracted lease agreement, there is so much that we can accomplish.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that assessment right there. And it's unbelievable to me as somebody on the ground, as I know you are as well in Providence, through a lot of different circles. In your case, you were just at my building, a major event, an anti-ice event that took place in a DIY venue in my building. And this is why it was so frustrating when Hasbro left too, because you're looking around, at this level, you're going, wow, there's a lot of talent here. I'm not saying 1 + 1 = 2 and you keep Hasbro. I'm just saying that it seems like the creative class is not engaged at all in what is supposed to be the creative capital. When we do engage with creatives, it feels like it's institutional, big number, big salaried kind of programming, nonprofits, things of this sort, and not the person who's doing something incredibly wild that needs a place to share that and put Providence on the map potentially. So I completely agree with that assessment.
And I'm glad you say that, Bill, because I also want to mention the fact that this past week, we saw Rhode Island Commerce Corporation approve $600,000 worth of subsidies to the new owners of Atlantic Mills. When I hear that number, $600,000, imagine how much could be accomplished if a layer of that amount in terms of a subsidy could be granted and divided out to local entrepreneurs and creative artists that are seeking brick and mortar spaces or seeking to renovate and improve their own artist spaces. There's so much that can be accomplished. But unfortunately, the attention tends to go, to your point, those around larger salaries and larger institutions like Hasbro. There was so much attention, there were so many subsidy packages that were actively being prepared to support Hasbro. Yet we don't have that same level of urgency when it comes to supporting our own local talent.
Yeah, it's completely wild. All right, last area here, and this is not to suggest that it is something worth burying, but look, ICE activity is happening in Providence. We know it's happening at courthouses. We know it's happening beyond that, but we have not seen the type of incursion that Minneapolis just experienced or Los Angeles or anything of that sort yet. However, it is fair to say, and it is totally reasonable to say, that Providence could receive some version of what we saw in Minneapolis. As mayor, how would you respond if ICE troops, let's be clear, if ICE troops were deployed in Providence?
We would already start coordinating with our city solicitor's office to explore the avenues of prosecuting rogue ICE agents that violate our sanctuary city laws. We saw the district attorney in Philadelphia take an approach. And when they started putting forward lawsuits against ICE agents in addition to the Department of Homeland Security, some of that activity started fading away. Legal action does lead to results. We need to pull every lever of government possible, including right here at the local level, to protect our neighbors from the terror of ICE. So almost immediately, and that planning would start now.
Representative David Morales, candidate for mayor of Providence against Brett Smiley, the incumbent. Rep, thanks as always. Look forward to our next conversation. We have so much to get into on housing and education and healthcare, and also more on fun, because I feel like I'm not saying it should be all happy joy right now, but in a depressing moment in a lot of ways, I think people are looking to find more fun in their community. And these are all things I want to talk to you about in the coming months here.
Our neighbors deserve joy and
That's
affordable
right.
housing. So again, as always, I appreciate it, Bill, and I look forward to the next one.
And thanks for listening to Bartholomewtown. We're here for you every Tuesday and Thursday. And we're brought to you by Half Street Group, who bring a new generation's perspective to leadership communications, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience, message, and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. Learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. We'll see you on Thursday, every Tuesday and Thursday, and whenever breaking news happens. It's Bartholomewtown. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Have a great day.